So last time we saw that King Saul was rejected by God himself as king, and King David was anointed, even though he was very young. You may look at his event and think that is just kind of a younger adult, but he really is kind of considered a kid in their eyes compared to everybody else, especially compared to the rest of Jesse's brothers. He's considered as just a child, and yet God looked at him and saw that his heart was the kind that he was looking for, and said, anoint him. So at this time, God has no longer receives Saul as king, and now he has chosen David, a child in a sense, but yet someone who is seeking after his heart to be king, just training him up in the ways that he should go, and a little bit more of him growing into maturity. But David is right now anointed as such. He is anointed as king. And in the end of chapter 16, Saul hears of this, or is told of this man David, and they have a connection that goes with, because the Spirit of the Lord departs from King Saul, and another spirit comes, and a spirit that comes and torments him. And someone said that, well, there's someone that I know of. This isn't too well known about David, or at least it's not emphasized too much. We always like to emphasize the warrior king side of David, but David was also a very musically talented person. And they said that he could play the lyre, he could play the harp really well. And so he brings him into his service, and he loves the effects of it, obviously, because it drives away the spirit, and also there's a calming presence with it. And then, so he actually hires him as part of his service, and so he's actually known as his armor bearer. And so he's a full-time, or well, not full-time, but he goes between being a shepherd boy and also going into being Saul's armor bearer. Now in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1, the enemies of Israel, verse 1 going on. But the enemies of Israel, the Philistines, are really wreaking havoc toward the Israelites once again. And now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soka, which belongs to Judah, and camped between Soka and Ezekiah in Aphis Damanum. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So scholars go back and forth. Of course, there's different notes and different study Bibles, but he's probably roughly about 8 to 9 to 10 feet tall. That's pretty tall. I mean, we have Robert Waldlove here in Alton, and he was about 8, something like that, 8'11", and so they consider that Goliath is either somewhere around there or taller even. So it's not impossible. It's definitely possible for someone to be that tall, but man, it would have been intimidating, especially for Israelites. and the thing of it is, Saul, their king, is known as head and shoulders above everybody else of the Israelites. But the note said the Israelites aren't that tall of a people. So especially Goliath is extremely huge to them. His span, or it was 6 cubits in a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, over 100 pounds, and he had bronze armor on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of the spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. So this guy is he's armored out. I mean, he's got like over 100 pounds somewhat on him, not to mention his own weight, being at 8 to 9 to 10 feet tall. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for?" And shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me." This was regularly done in battle, that you could have a representative to represent your entire army, to come out and to shout out to the armies. And if he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. It's pretty high stakes, but the Philistines were willing to stake it on that. "But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Saul, probably as well as anybody else, Saul, like I mentioned, is being head and shoulders above everybody else. Being that tall and being a warrior, and considering that how strong he is against the Ammonites and everybody else that he comes up against, except for the Philistines, it seems to be that the Philistines are his weakness. And you have someone this big shouting out, and all the Israelites are probably thinking, well, Saul's taller than everybody else. Saul might be a little bit stronger than everybody else. And so Saul's probably shaking his boots in a sense, like, oh, I don't want to fight against him. Find someone else, not me. And as Goliath is the representative of the Philistines, they had to put a lot of trust in him. With a guy that tall and can have that much armor, you probably would put a lot of trust in him. But the stakes were extremely high. It would be one man against another man, and whoever wins, you're going to win the entire army. You're going to win to be that person's servants, that person's slave. And now in 31, going on to verse 31, so David, as Saul's armor bearer, hears of this, and Jesse sends him out to take care of the sheep, and then he comes back for his older brothers. He has 3 older brothers that are enlisted in the service, in Saul's service, and they need provision. So he goes out there and takes care of them, and then he hears Goliath shouting forth these blasphemies. He hears Goliath shouting forth these calls of defying Israelite armies and the Lord. And he says, why do people just kind of let him do this? Why are people letting him say whatever he wants? The army's probably thinking to themselves, well, it's easy for you to say, kid. You don't have to worry about fighting against this guy. But he's like, this isn't right. And David says this, and then his older brother's like, hey, you should be saying these words. And then the word eventually gets to King Saul. And Saul does a little bit more about it. Verse 31, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul's thinking, wow, okay. This shepherd boy, this armor bearer, I know he can play the harp pretty well, but I'm not too sure if you're the right man for this battle. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go out against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I struck him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Notice the difference. If you go back and you read what the people are saying, the people are all focused on the physicality of everything. They're focused on, well, the fact that he's saying this, and it's our physical army, and it's about Israel. And David brings up the spiritual aspect. He has spiritual eyes to see what's really going on. He's saying that this is not just a man that's defying an army. He's defying the armies of the living God. He's defying God. How are you letting him spew out these blasphemies? Which just goes to show how much of a caring heart that David has. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail, and David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. He didn't even want the armor. Probably couldn't fit all that well. Considering that it was Saul's armor himself. At this point, you almost wonder if Saul's thinking that he's sending him out on a suicide mission, like he's just going to send him out, and Saul's like, well, nobody else is going to step up, so we'll just go ahead and let this little kid do what he's got to do, and then I guess we're just kind of all in. We're just going to have to go in after this and hope for the best, and we know that he's probably going to get slain, and we'll just kind of do our own thing after that. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. David once again having a spiritual mindset. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I'll give the dead bodies of the host to the Philistines this day, to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all of this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. He probably didn't know he could talk back like that. When the Philistine rose and came and drew near to David, David ran quickly into the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and fell on his face to the ground. And just like that, the battle was over. It wasn't a very long-lasting battle. At that time, probably Saul and everybody else was looking on with their jaws dropped to the ground, realizing what has actually happened. Now, a lot of times when we look at this, we compare ourselves, put ourselves in David's shoes and saying that we're up against all of the Goliaths in our own lives. But a lot of times when we do that, we think that it's just us, that we are David, and that we are up against Goliath. But we forget the power of God that's behind us. Because David mentions himself that, well, I know that I can do this because when I was a shepherd, the Lord delivered me from all of these other things. And so therefore I know that the Lord will also deliver me from this Philistine. David gave full credit to the Lord, and he mentions that the Lord is going to be the one who's going to deliver me. He says that he's going to show that he doesn't deliver through sword or through spear, but it's through the name of the Lord. And David immediately gives the praise to, which shows so much of a contrast between that and the current heart of King Saul, of how Saul's so focused on himself, so focused on his own name, so focused on everything that he could get praise for. And yet David is focused on the fact that he's going to be delivered by God to do this very act. In Isaiah 40, we mentioned Isaiah this morning. But Isaiah 40, verse 27 says, How do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right hand is disregarded by my God? Have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth, who does not faint or grow weary, his understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases strength. Even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. If you feel as though that you're in that weak spot, you're in that weak position where you feel like I can't do this by myself, I can't do this on my own, then you're in the perfect position to be used by God. You're in the perfect position to receive strength from Him. Because he doesn't love to use those who are naturally strong in their own, or at least think they're own strong in their own ability. He loves to use people who know they cannot do it without God. So all of our own Goliaths that we have in our lives isn't just that we got to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and just hope that we're good enough with the sling to try and knock it down. It's the fact that David called upon the name of the Lord. And we have to do the same. It's that calling upon the name of the Lord that rescues us. It's not our own strength, it's not our own wisdom, it's not our own just smarts, it's us calling upon Him who is all wise and all strong. Now in another text which we won't quite look at, if you want to turn there you can, but in Isaiah 43, he's talking to people about their Babylonian captivity. And the fact that most of the people have been brought over into Babylon and the rest that are just laid to waste, the ones that survive, are stuck there in complete desolation, complete destruction. And Isaiah told the people this would happen. But he gave them hope in what they were going through and said that if you will but call upon the name of the Lord and if you will remain faithful, then the Lord will rescue you. And he said that not only is he going to rescue you, but everything that you've received from the past by His mercy, by His grace, is going to be seen as insignificant compared to what He's going to do now. In Isaiah 43, he mentions about that I'm doing a new thing, that as an Israelite, your past is wrapped up in two main events, the Passover and then the parting of the Red Sea. So as the people are walking through the Red Sea, and they've just partaken of the Passover, and they've been rescued, they've been delivered, they've been redeemed, And as an Israelite, that matters so much to you. Because how many times in the Scriptures does God repeat that? Even in the New Testament. It's repeated, the Passover. It's repeated as the redemption acts of God. And he said, you know how great that was for your people? And even still today, when the Jews celebrate Passover, they speak about it as if they've experienced it themselves. That as we have gone through the land, as we have come out of Egypt. And he compares what God did to the people back in Egypt. And he says, it's what I'm going to do now, don't even consider it. Because it's going to be far greater than what I've done in Egypt. It's going to be far better. He mentions that I'm doing a new thing. He even says to not remember the former ways. That's how great the act is that God's going to do. And the thing that I think that really gets David's soul stirred to know that the fact that he's going to be victorious over Goliath is because he mentions that God has delivered me before from all of these horrible acts. God has delivered me from the hand of the lion. God has delivered me from the hand of the bear. And so therefore I know that God's going to deliver me from the hand of the Philistines. That's how David knew that God was going to work in his life, because he knew that God had a great credit history of working in his life. For us, in our own situations, we can look back and say, God's been so faithful to me in the past. Why would he not be faithful now? You know, people look up credit histories, or people look up your background, and God has a great credit history of being so faithful to his people. He is so faithful to his covenant. He's so faithful to his promises. Hebrews even mentions how heavy of an emphasis it is the fact that God swears by himself, because there's no greater name. And remember when Abraham, when he was instituting the Abrahamic covenant, and Abraham has all these animal halves in between, and Abraham's actually supposed to be the one that walks between them. But God's actually the one who walks between them. Because that was to show that may it be like, may one of these animals, may I be like made one of these animals if I don't keep my end of the covenant, if I don't keep my end of the promise. And God does that himself. Abraham falls asleep, and God is the one who walks between making the covenant. The heaviness of that. God was faithful in delivering his people. God was faithful in delivering David. And David knew that throughout all of his life, he knew that he would do it again. And sometimes we can forget that. We can forget where God has taken us from and where God is working in our lives. Consider that in Revelation chapter 2, when the letters go out to the 7 churches, and he rebukes this one church because they have, first he praises them for all the things that they're doing well. He says, you have good doctrine, you're doing right works, you're doing everything that I would hope for you to do, everything that I want for you to do. But he said, you have this against you, that you've abandoned the love you had at first. Which is kind of a scary statement to me, because they were doing all of the right actions. But he said they were doing them in a sense with the love that they didn't have at first. They had forgotten their first love. And so he tells them to repent, to remember the works that you did at first. He says, if you don't, I'll remove your lampstand from its place. I'll remove your church from you. And there's really something to be said that if we don't remember where God has taken us out of, that if we don't remember where God has redeemed us from, that really doesn't give us much strength for the next time, the next season of our lives. And how good it is for us to remember. But these things aren't just to be mementos. Like all the great works in our lives that God has done for us aren't meant to just be mementos, that we're like, oh, well, that was really nice, and we put it on a shelf and look at it every now and then. Oh, that's sweet. And then you walk away. They're not mementos, but they're degrees. They're to be used. They're to be practiced. They're to be motivators to continue on, to be steadfast, to be faithful, because we know that God has always been faithful. God's victories in our lives are not meant to just be put on a shelf and for us to forget about them, or even just to look and fondly reflect upon them every now and then. They're meant to drive us to do good works. They're meant to drive us to be faithful. We may have had great victories in our life, which is very good and very great. But those defeats of the bears and those defeats of the lions are calling us to defeat our Goliath as well. And David could have never, probably even would have imagined to gone up to Goliath if it wasn't for the fact that he recalled the fact that God had delivered him in the past. It may not have been his first instinct. You have this maybe 10-foot person with 100 pounds of armor on him, and for a little kid, it may not have been his first instinct. He hears all these armies that are the army of the Lord that's afraid of him, and then he hears this guy shouting all kinds of blasphemies, and he thinks, I think I can take him. It may not have been his first mind if he hadn't thought about the fact that God had delivered him from all of these great beasts. May have been, well, that's sad. Okay, I'm going to go take care of my sheep now. But he remembered, God had delivered me before. Why wouldn't he do it again? God had delivered me from wild beasts when I was taking care of sheep. God can deliver me from Goliath. And probably he was weighing the options that, you know what, even if he doesn't, I'm still doing the right thing. Because you have the people which defied, they would not bow before the golden statue, the great statue of the king at the time. And they came up to the king and they said, well, God will deliver us, even if you do throw us into the fire furnace. But if he does not, we're not going to worship your God. We're not going to worship your image. They figured that if God doesn't, we know we're still doing the right thing. We know we're still being faithful. David knew that God would deliver him because he had been faithful in the past. We, together as a corporate body, have had great victories in the past, and this is all very good. But God wants us to go up to the next level. That always calls us up to the next level of in Him. That if we ever feel like we're satisfied with we read the Bible and we just get done with it, we're like, that's great, I'm going to close this book now and it's not going to have any more effect on me. I know everything there is to know. I heard some people that said that, I don't really need to bring the Bible or read the Bible anymore because I already know everything that's in it anymore. I'm like, man, okay. Yeah, quote to me Isaiah 41:7 then. I'm not there. I'll never be there in this life. Of knowing just everything I'm always wanting to search more and more and get deeper and deeper. That's the way we should be. The desire there, because there's always that next level in Him. There's always that thirst of getting more in Him. God calls us in our past victories to be mindful of the fact that He has made us overcomers. Greater than overcomers. Greater than those who are triumphant. More than overcomers. Paul uses that terminology. In the Greek, it's extremely puzzling. Paul, how could you become more than an overcomer? It's great enough to destroy an army that you consider it an overcomer. What does it mean to be above that? That you're above the overcomer. We have a battle that we fight as well. Last verse this evening, Ephesians chapter 6. But notice the context. That it's in His strength that we fight. Ephesians 6, verse 10. Paul says, finally be strong in the Lord and the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil, even in the heavenly places. We have a great enemy, but we have a greater God. We have a much greater God. We have an enemy that's been here much longer than all of us here in this room have combined, and he knows how to push our buttons. He knows how to. The goal is to deactivate those buttons. Satan can know where to tempt us and how to tempt us, and we want to make those buttons that may start out this big. If our temptation is anger, or if our temptation is lying, or whatever it may be, and the goal is to make that button as small as possible until it's eventually deactivated. And Satan no longer has that button to push. He's powerless over it. There's no more hoops to grab onto. But our Lord is strong. He is mighty. And He will take us to the next level.